Orion Ellis pressed his fingers to the worn piano keys like he was trying to forget who he was. The old upright in the corner of the community center's multipurpose room had seen better decades, but he loved it for exactly that reason. No one would ever think a millionaire would be playing it. Especially not Orion, whose face had once been on the cover of Forbes with the headline, "Tech's Golden Boy Turns 25. But nobody here knew that. He'd told the center director his name was just Ori and they'd welcomed him without blinking. Twice a week he came in after hours to play for the open mic nights. No cameras. No business partners. Just music and a room full of people who didn't care about his bank account. He liked it that way. Tonight, he barely finished the last chord of a moody jazz piece when a voice behind him said, "You play like you've lived 3 lifetimes." Orion turned around. She was standing just off the edge of the tiny stage, holding a mic with one hand and a to-go coffee in the other. Her black jeans were ripped at the knees. Her hair was curly and wild like she hadn't bothered to tame it. And her eyes, God, her eyes looked like they'd caught fire and never burned out. "I just play," he said, blinking once. "You gonna sing?" She shrugged. "If I can follow that." He stood up, gesturing to the piano. "All yours." "No," she said, stepping up beside him. "Stay. I sing better when someone plays." Orion sat back down without thinking. She cleared her throat, closed her eyes, and when she started singing, Orion forgot how to breathe. It wasn't just that her voice was good, it was raw and aching and real, like she'd cracked open her chest and poured everything out into the mic. He didn't even know the song. Maybe she was making it up. It didn't matter. The room had gone quiet, the kind of silence that only came when something rare was happening. When she finished, no one clapped. They were too stunned. Then came the thunder of it, applause, whistles, cheers. But Orion didn't hear any of it. She turned to him, still flushed from singing, and smiled. "I'm Harlow," she said, offering her hand. He took it. "Ori. Just Ori. Just Ori." Her brow lifted. Mysterious. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Not with her hand still in his and his heart doing something he wasn't used to racing. After the show, she tracked him down by the snack table. "You play here often?" she asked, grabbing a cookie. "Twice a week." "Me too. Usually Tuesdays, but tonight I felt like drowning out the world. Guess I crashed your night." "I'm not complaining." She smiled again, and it made his chest feel tight. They talked for over an hour. About music, stupid childhood stories, the way some people smelled like rain before it actually rained. She told him she'd grown up in the city, worked as a server during the day, and wrote songs at night. No sob story. No drama. Just life. He didn't tell her anything real. Not yet. But he watched her every move. The way she used her hands when she talked. How she laughed like she didn't care who was listening. He wanted to see her again. Needed to. So the next Tuesday he came back. And she was there. This time she brought her own songbook. Asked him to play for her. "You sure?" he asked. "You're the best pianist I've heard in years." "Yeah, I'm sure." So he played. And she sang. And just like that, it became a thing. Every Tuesday night. They didn't talk about last names or jobs or anything that might ruin it. It was music and coffee, and that weird kind of electricity that made the air feel heavier when she walked into the room. One night, 3 weeks in, she leaned against the piano while he played something soft and slow. "You ever fall in love through a song?" she asked. He looked up at her. "Is that possible?" She tilted her head. "I think it is." He didn't say anything. But the next note he hit felt different. Like maybe it meant something. The next week, he brought her a coffee before she could ask. She raised an eyebrow. "You remembered?" "Hazelnut oat milk. 1 sugar. I pay attention." Her smile was quiet and stunned. "Most guys don't." "I'm not most guys." That part was true. He just hadn't told her how true. After 2 months of piano and midnight conversations, he couldn't take it anymore. He invited her out. Not to some glitzy 5-star restaurant. Not yet. Just a quiet rooftop bar downtown where the music was low and the stars looked close enough to touch. She wore a black leather jacket and red lipstick that made his heart skip. "You clean up okay," she teased. He laughed, but his chest was tight. "You look, don't say like a dream. That's cheesy. I was gonna say dangerous." She grinned. "Better." They talked for hours. He bought her the most expensive cocktail on the menu without blinking. She didn't notice. But he noticed her. Every time her laugh caught in her throat. Every time she looked at him like she was trying to memorize his face. When he walked her home, she stopped at the building's front steps. "I had fun," she said. "Me too." She hesitated, then leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't careful. It wasn't polite. It was bold and full of heat, like she was daring him to feel something. And he did. He kissed her back, hands on her waist, heart pounding like he was 17 again. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "See you next Tuesday?" He nodded. Every Tuesday. But he didn't wait that long. The next day, he sent flowers to her apartment. Not a dozen roses, too cliché. He sent white gardenias and a note that just said, "For the voice that wrecked me." He didn't sign it. She didn't mention it the next time they met. But she kissed him again, harder this time. And that was enough. They started seeing each other outside the center. Late-night drives. Cheap pizza on sidewalks. Long walks through the park where she'd sing snippets of songs she hadn't finished. He loved all of it. One night, she asked, "What do you do, Ori? Like, for real?" He froze. Then said, "I'll tell you. Soon." She didn't push. She trusted him. And that made it worse. Because he was falling. Fast. Hard. And she still didn't know who he really was. Not yet. But she would. Soon. The rain had started halfway through their rooftop date the following week, chasing them into the stairwell of Harlow's building. They were soaked through, laughing, her eyeliner smudged in a way that made her look even more alive. She leaned her head on his shoulder as they sat on the steps, water dripping from her curls onto his shirt. "I should be mad," she said quietly. "Because I didn't bring an umbrella? Because I don't even care that I'm freezing. I just want to stay right here." Orion didn't answer. He wrapped his arm around her instead, pulling her closer, wondering how long he could keep this version of his life before the truth caught up with him. The next evening, he sat in his penthouse office, staring out at a skyline that used to thrill him. Now it felt sterile, colorless. He'd built the company from nothing, turned an app into a global platform, bought out 2 competitors before he was 26. But none of it felt like much anymore. His assistant, Camille, knocked and entered with her usual brisk efficiency. "Your mother called twice," she said. "She insists you attend the foundation gala on Friday. The one she's been planning since Christmas. I'll send a donation. She said if you don't show, she'll have your head mounted in the foyer next to the antique saber." Orion sighed. "Fine, I'll go. But I'm not staying long." Camille hesitated, then added, "Also, the press is digging again. They think you've dropped out of the social circuit for a reason. Rumors about a secret engagement. Or rehab. Let them guess." "I'm not giving them anything." As soon as she left, he opened his private phone and scrolled through his gallery. Every photo was Harlow. Candid shots she didn't know he'd taken her laughing at a street magician, singing with her eyes closed on stage, lying on the grass in Prospect Park with a pen stuck behind her ear and her notebook open across her stomach. He hadn't told her he owned a company, or that he lived in the tallest building downtown, or that the watch he wore, the one she'd playfully spun around his wrist one night, cost more than her monthly rent. He told himself it wasn't lying. Just withholding. Protecting what they had from becoming something else. But that excuse was wearing thin. Especially when she showed up outside the community center the next Tuesday waiting for him with a grin and a wrapped sandwich. "You didn't eat before you came last time," she said. "I noticed. You brought me dinner." She handed it to him. "I didn't poison it." "Probably." He unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite. "You're dangerous. You've mentioned that before. I think I underestimated just how much." They played together that night like they were the only two people on earth. Her voice was more powerful than usual, her lyrics sharper. He didn't ask what the song was about, but he felt that something had shifted. After the crowd cleared, she lingered by the piano, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "My landlord's raising rent again," she said. "He's got some new developer putting pressure on him to sell the building. Says we'll all be out by summer. Do you have somewhere to go?" "Not yet. I've been looking, but everything decent is either an hour away or twice what I can afford." Orion leaned back, trying to ignore the adrenaline spike in his chest. "Would you let someone help you?" he asked cautiously. Her eyes narrowed. "You mean financially?" "I mean, if someone offered you something better, would you take it?" She crossed her arms. "Depends who's offering. And why?" He didn't push it. He couldn't. Not without revealing everything. Instead, he changed the subject. "Play me something you've never sung before," he said. She hesitated, then sat down at the piano beside him. Her fingers hovered over the keys before she played a slow, haunting melody. No lyrics, just music. Delicate, aching, like a lullaby for something broken. When she finished, she didn't look at him. "My mom wrote that," she said softly. "She used to hum it when she thought I couldn't sleep. Where is she now?" "Gone. Cancer. Years ago." He didn't ask more, just rested his hand over hers on the keys. She didn't move it. That night he called Camille. "I need you to find out who owns the building at 92 Orchard. And if they're looking to sell. You want to buy the property? I want to own it by morning." Quietly. "Understood." He hung up and stared at the ceiling, wondering how many secrets love could survive. On Friday, he went to the gala. It was held at the Metropolitan Club, all marble columns and gold trim. Men in tuxedos, women in gowns that sparkled like ice. He walked in late, hoping to avoid the press outside, but his mother spotted him within seconds. "Darling," she said, kissing both his cheeks, "you look exhausted. Are you working too hard again?" "I'm fine. You haven't brought anyone. I thought you said you were seeing someone." He paused. "I didn't say that." "Well, someone said it. Camille, perhaps. I don't know." He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "Let's not do this tonight." She narrowed her eyes. "Is she the reason you've been hiding?" "I'm not hiding. You skipped the charity dinner. And the board's ski retreat. I needed space." She lowered her voice. "You're not a boy anymore, Orion. If this girl, whoever she is going to ruin your image, then..." "She's not ruining anything," he snapped, louder than intended. Heads turned. His mother's eyes cooled. "Then prove it," she said. "Bring her to something real. Introduce her properly." He left before dessert. Back in his penthouse, he paced the living room, staring at the skyline again. Then he pulled out his phone and tapped her number. The call went to voicemail. He ended it before leaving a message. Saturday morning, she called him back. "Sorry I missed you," she said. "I was recording a demo. My friend's producer owed her a favor." "How'd it go?" "Better than I thought. He said I should come back. Maybe put together a small EP." "That's amazing. Don't congratulate me yet. Studio time isn't free." He took a breath. "I want to show you something. Today. Can you meet me?" "Where?" "I'll send a car." She hesitated. "A car? Just trust me." She agreed. 2 hours later, she stepped out of the back seat of a black SUV in front of a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. He was waiting on the steps. "This is not what I expected," she said. "I bought it last month. I've been fixing it up. Thought you might want to see it." She raised an eyebrow. "You own this?" He nodded. "Come inside." The interior was all exposed brick and restored hardwood. Big windows. A baby grand piano in the corner. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because I'm tired of pretending. I'm not just some guy who plays piano at a community center. I run a tech company. I live in a place with a view of Central Park. And I'm not sorry about any of that. But I didn't want it to be the reason you looked at me." She didn't say anything. He stepped closer. I bought your building. The one on Orchard. You're not getting evicted. None of you are. Her mouth opened slightly. You. What? I had to do something. I couldn't watch you lose your home. She stepped back. You lied to me. I didn't lie. You let me think you were like me. Struggling. Ordinary. I never said I was. You didn't have to. He reached for her, but she moved away. This changes everything, she said. I don't even know who I've been kissing. I'm still me. No, she whispered. You're someone who owns buildings and sends cars and fixes problems with money. That's not the world I live in. I wanted to protect this, he said. Us. She looked at him for a long time, then turned and walked out the door. He didn't follow. Not yet. Orion stared at the door long after it closed behind her, the echo of her footsteps trailing down the steps like the last notes of a symphony that ended too soon. He hadn't moved. Couldn't. His hands were clenched at his sides, jaw tight, heartbeat ragged against his ribs. He'd thought the truth would set them free. Instead, it had shattered the fragile, perfect thing they'd built together. Because no matter how honest his heart had been, he hadn't trusted her with the whole of him. And now she didn't know what to believe. The next morning, the city was gray and brittle with cold. Orion canceled every meeting on his calendar and walked the streets for hours, hood up, hands in his coat pockets, trying to think through the storm in his head. He passed the bodega where she liked to grab tea before open mic nights. The alley where she'd once dragged him to listen to a street violinist who played like he was possessed. The mural she'd said reminded her of her mother's handwriting, erratic, beautiful, impossible to miss once you noticed. Every corner of the city had traces of her now. By nightfall, he stood outside the community center, staring up at its flickering sign. He hadn't been back since the night she walked away. His fingers itched for the piano, but the thought of playing without her voice beside him made his chest ache. Inside, the lights were low. He slipped into the back of the room, unnoticed, as someone else took the mic, a kid with more courage than rhythm. Orion didn't listen. He was watching the door. She never came. He left before the set ended. Back in his apartment, he sat at the grand piano by the window. It was perfectly tuned, polished to a mirror sheen, and utterly silent. He stared at the keys, but his hands wouldn't move. The doorbell rang. He stood, pulse kicking up. But when he opened the door, it wasn't her. It was Camille. She stepped inside, her heels echoing against the marble floor. I figured you wouldn't be at the office, she said. You've gone ghost on half of Manhattan. I'm not in the mood for a lecture. She dropped a thick envelope on the table. This came from the Orchard building. Tenants signed the renewal contracts. No rent hikes. You're officially their anonymous landlord. He stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. Camille crossed her arms. You know, in all the years I've worked for you, I've seen you close deals that would make seasoned CEOs sweat. You've negotiated with billionaires, stood on world stages, outmaneuvered entire boards. But one woman walks away and you unravel. She wasn't supposed to leave? Then maybe you should have told her who you were before she had to find out from a house tour. He looked away. Camille softened. You're not the only one who's terrified, Orion. She let you into her world. You just didn't trust her enough to let her into yours. After she left, he sat at the piano again. This time he played. He didn't stop until sunrise. Meanwhile, across the city, Harlow stood in the middle of her tiny apartment, surrounded by boxes she hadn't packed. Her lease had been renewed without explanation, the rent unchanged. No warning. No notice. Just a letter slid under her door with the new terms and a contact number that led nowhere. She'd called twice. No answer. Her roommate, Lita, had tilted her head when she read the letter. You think it was him? Harlow didn't respond. He bought the building, didn't he? I don't know. Yes, you do. Harlow sat on the couch, eyes burning. I don't even know his last name. Lita dropped beside her. You do realize most girls would be thrilled to find out their guy is a millionaire who wants to save their home, right? I'm not most girls. Clearly. Harlow rubbed her temples. I just keep wondering. If I'd met him at a gala in a suit with his bank account front and center, would I have let myself fall for him? Or would I have walked the other way? Lita leaned back. Maybe he didn't tell you because he wanted something real. Or maybe he didn't trust that I could handle the truth. A week passed. Then another. Neither of them reached out. But on the third Tuesday without him, Harlow walked into the community center anyway. Her chest tightened the moment she stepped inside, the scent of old wood and coffee triggering something deep and unnameable. The piano sat untouched on the stage. She ran her fingers over it, then sat down. She didn't sing, just played. When she finished, the room clapped softly. But it wasn't the applause she listened for. He wasn't there. Later that night, she stood outside a private recording studio in the West Village, clutching a demo CD in her hand. The producer had offered her a real shot recording time, a small label interested in new talent. It was everything she'd worked toward. But all she could think about was the boy who played piano like he bled through the keys, who listened to her lyrics like they were gospel. After her session, she walked aimlessly, the cold biting her skin. She ended up outside a building she'd only seen once, the brownstone he'd shown her. The lights were off. No sound. She turned to leave, but the front door creaked open. He stood there, barefoot, hoodie hanging loose, eyes hollow. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, she stepped forward. "I didn't come here to argue," she said. "Then why did you come?" "Because you didn't chase me." His brows pulled together. "You told me not to. And since when do you listen when you're told no?" He exhaled, stepping aside. She walked past him into the house. It looked the same. Except now there were drawings on the table, sketches of renovations, notes in his handwriting. A guitar leaned against the wall. A half-finished song sat on the piano stand. She turned to him. "You wrote something?" "I tried." "Play it." He sat, fingers brushing the keys. Then he looked up. "I'm not good at apologies," he said. "But I'll try." The song started soft, hesitant, the melody slow and uncertain. Then it shifted deeper, fuller, a crescendo that built like a confession. He didn't sing, just played. And every note said what he couldn't. When he finished, he turned to her. "I was scared," he said. "Not of being seen. Of being misunderstood. Of you thinking I was just another rich guy playing at something real." Her eyes didn't waver. "And what are you?" "I'm a guy who's spent his whole life building things that don't matter. And then I met you and suddenly, nothing else did." She crossed the room. "I don't need the brownstone. Or the piano. Or the rooftop views. I know. I need the guy who listens when I sing, even when I'm off key." He reached for her hand. "I'm right here." She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. "You bought my building. I'd do it again." She kissed him, slow and certain. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "Next time, don't hide." He nodded. "Next time, I'll give you everything." And he meant it. Every word. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the brownstone, casting golden lines across the wood floor. Harlow stood barefoot in the kitchen, her curls falling loose down her back as she filled the kettle. Orion leaned against the doorway behind her, watching the way her shoulders moved with a quiet rhythm like she belonged in the space already. "You drink tea in the morning?" he asked. She glanced over her shoulder. "When I'm trying not to fall back into old habits. Like coffee for breakfast. Or nothing at all." He stepped closer. "I could make us something." Her brow lifted. "You cook." "I have a chef. But I've learned a few things." She narrowed her eyes. "Are you saying you want to cook for me? Or you want to have your chef do it and claim credit?" He took the kettle from her hand. "Sit. I've got it." She did, crossing to the island and curling onto the stool. He moved through the kitchen with surprising ease, pulling eggs and herbs from the fridge, heating a pan like he'd done it 100 times. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the air. She watched him in silence, her expression unreadable. When he slid a plate in front of her, she blinked. "You made this." "I told you. I pay attention." She took a bite, then another. "You really did." They ate together quietly, the only sound the faint hum of the city outside the windows. Afterward, she stood at the sink, rinsing her plate. He came up behind her, hands at her waist, his voice low. "Stay the day." She didn't turn. "What would we do?" "Whatever you want. Even if what I want is to walk through the park and pretend we're just two people figuring it out. I'll put on a hoodie." She smiled faintly. "Fine. But I'm choosing the music." They walked through Fort Greene Park later that morning, heads down against the wind, her hand tucked into his pocket with his. They passed a group of kids playing tag, a man walking 3 massive dogs, and a woman sketching on a bench. No one looked twice at them. I used to come here with my mom, Harlow said, her voice softer. She'd pack sandwiches we couldn't really afford and hum whatever song was stuck in her head that week. He didn't interrupt. She told me once that every heartbreak had its own tempo, she continued. That when you meet someone who matches your rhythm, you never forget them. He looked at her. Do I match yours? I think you might be the first person who does. They kept walking until the sun was high overhead. When they returned to the brownstone, she collapsed onto the couch, pulling her knees up beneath her. He sat beside her, then reached for the notebook she'd left on the coffee table. Can I read something? She hesitated. They're not finished. I don't care. She handed it over. He flipped through pages filled with scribbled verses, crossed out lines, margin notes written in sharp, looping handwriting. He stopped at one page near the back. This one, he said. Sing it to me. It's not ready. Neither were we. She took the notebook back, read the words once, then set it down. She didn't need it. Her voice came softly at first, then gained strength. The lyrics told the story of someone who built walls so high, no one could reach them until someone did. And that love didn't crash through, it climbed, patient and careful, until the walls came down on their own. When she finished, Orion's throat felt thick. You wrote that after you left. She nodded. I was angry. But I wasn't done. He reached for her hand. Neither am I. That night, he took her to a hidden jazz lounge tucked beneath a flower shop in Soho. The entrance was through a walk-in refrigerator, the kind of place only people in the know could find. Inside, the room glowed amber, filled with velvet chairs and candlelight. A trio played in the corner, trumpet, bass, and drums. She leaned into him as they Saturday. How did you even know about this place? I used to come here when I needed to disappear. I'm starting to think you're better at hiding than you let on. Not anymore. She looked at him, her expression open. What do you want, Orion? He didn't hesitate. You. In my life. In my home. On my worst days and my best. Not as someone I visit on Tuesdays. As someone I wake up next to on Sundays. Her fingers tightened around her glass. That's a lot. I know. And you're sure. I've never been more sure of anything. She didn't answer right away, but her hand found his under the table and stayed there. The next week, she moved in. Not because he asked her to. Because she wanted to. She brought her notebooks, her guitar, her chipped coffee mug, and the framed photo of her mother that had always sat on her dresser. He cleared space for all of it. No questions. No hesitation. They built a rhythm. Mornings were quiet coffee and music and the occasional burnt toast. Afternoons were unpredictable, her studio sessions, his meetings, shared texts about songs or headlines or things they wanted to remember. Evenings were theirs. Always. 2 weeks after she moved in, Camille dropped by. She didn't knock. She walked in, holding a stack of papers and a bottle of wine. I've been instructed to deliver both, she said. One is your quarterly forecast. The other is just good manners. Harlow stood from the couch. You must be Camille. Camille smiled. And you're the reason I've had to reschedule half my boss's calendar. Harlow tilted her head. You're welcome. They sat for a while, sipping wine, Camille flipping through the papers while Harlow watched her with mild amusement. You really run things around here, don't you? Harlow asked. Someone has to. He gets distracted. Orion raised a brow. I'm literally right here. Camille ignored him. He's better with you. Later that night, Harlow stood at the piano, her fingers drifting over the keys without playing. I've been thinking about something, she said. Orion looked up from his laptop. Yeah, the brownstone. You never told me what you actually want to do with it. He closed the laptop. I bought it for us. But it's more space than we need. And it's in a neighborhood full of people who could use more than a shiny new renovation. He watched her carefully. What are you saying? She turned to face him fully. What if we turned the ground floor into a creative space? A music studio, a writing workshop, a place where people like me before all of this could come and create without worrying about rent or silence. He stood, crossing to her. You want to build something together. I want to give back the way you gave to me. He nodded slowly. Then we'll do it. She blinked. Just like that. I've built empires out of less. That weekend, they began planning. They met with architects, community organizers, and educators. Harlow reached out to past producers and mentors. Orion handled the logistics, the funding, the legal maze. But every decision was made together. And one evening, as they stood in the empty, echoing space that would soon be filled with music and light, he turned to her. There's something I've been waiting to do. She looked up. What? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. He opened it. Inside, the ring was simple, elegant, a rose gold band with a single oval-cut diamond, flanked by 2 tiny sapphires. She stared at it, then at him. I didn't want to ask you until I knew you'd seen all of me. The good. The complicated. The part that disappears behind credit cards and headlines. But now I want you to know that wherever you go, I'll be there. Not with gifts. With everything. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She nodded once. And when he slid the ring onto her finger, the world felt exactly right. Months later, the studio opened. The first night, they hosted a showcase for local artists, including a few of the kids from the community center. Harlow performed last, singing the song she'd written the week they reunited. When she reached the final note, Orion was already on his feet. The entire room followed. And as the applause echoed around them, she looked out over the crowd, her eyes finding his. She didn't need to say a word. He already knew. Their rhythm was real. And it would never stop. The night before the studio's official launch gala, Harlow stood barefoot in the middle of the newly finished performance space, her arms crossed as she studied the lighting grid above the small stage. The room smelled faintly of sawdust and fresh paint, with the last of the construction tarps rolled up near the back wall. It was finally real. Orion stepped in behind her, his tie undone, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked at her like she was the most important thing in the room. Despite the fact that tomorrow, media outlets and industry giants would be packed into this very space to celebrate a project the city had already begun whispering about. I think we need warmer bulbs in the corner spots, she said. It feels too clinical over there. He glanced upward. We can swap them out in the morning. Or we could just move the table setup and lean into the shadows. I want the performers to feel seen. That corner's for the open mic poets. He smiled and pressed a kiss to her temple. Then they'll be seen. She turned to him, eyes scanning his face. Are you nervous? I've pitched investors with more on the line, but somehow this feels bigger. Because it is. This isn't about profit margins or shareholder reports. He nodded. This is about giving people a place to belong. She reached for his hand. We built that. They left the studio late, walking the 2 blocks back to the brownstone under a sky full of stars. The sidewalks were quiet, the city holding its breath for the next day. At home, Harlow collapsed onto the couch and kicked her feet onto the coffee table. Orion brought over 2 mugs of herbal tea and sat next to her, stretching his legs out. Your mother would have loved this, he said. Not just what you've done. Who you've become. She didn't answer at first. Then she nodded, her voice steady. She used to say that the best songs are the ones you don't write alone. That life is a duet. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. I've been holding on to this. She opened it slowly. Inside was a deed with both their names. Not just to the brownstone. To the entire studio property. You added me, she said. You asked me to build something with you. I want you to own it with me, too. Her voice caught. You didn't have to do that. I know. That's why it matters. The next night, the gala was a storm of glittering gowns, tailored tuxedos, and champagne flutes. The studio had been transformed with soft lighting, live jazz, and framed photos of the community artists they'd already supported. Media crews hovered near the entrance, trying to get a clean shot of Orion and Harlow together as they arrived. She wore a deep green satin gown, hair swept back to show off the delicate gold earrings he'd given her that morning. He hadn't said a word when he saw her step out of the dressing room, but the way his hand gripped hers all night said everything. Inside, she mingled with guests, accepting praise with grace while gently redirecting the attention to the art and the artists. Orion watched her from across the room at one point, speaking with a city councilwoman about arts funding. She looked entirely at ease, like she was finally in a world that matched her fire. Later, they stood side by side on the stage, preparing to address the crowd. She leaned into the mic. This space started as an idea I scribbled in a notebook, something I never believed I'd see become real. But then I met someone who reminded me that dreams don't have deadlines. They just need partners. The audience applauded, but she wasn't looking at them. Her gaze was locked on him. He stepped forward. This isn't just a launch. It's a promise that art matters, that voices deserve to be heard regardless of the price tag attached to them. And that sometimes when the right people find each other, they don't just fall in love, they build something that lasts. After the speeches, the performances began. Local musicians, spoken word artists, and dancers graced the stage in a seamless thread of talent and vulnerability. Harlow sat beside Orion in the front row, her hand in his, her eyes shining every time someone stepped up who only months ago had nowhere to share their voice. The final act was a young girl of about 16, her voice trembling as she began to sing a song she'd written herself. The lyrics were raw, imperfect, but full of hope. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Harlow wiped her cheek. That's why we did this. Orion didn't speak. He just reached for her hand and kissed her knuckles. As the night wound down, guests began to drift out. Orion and Harlow remained, walking the halls of the studio in their formal wear, heels in her hand, bow tie in his pocket. They peeked into the practice rooms, now filled with instruments and soundproof panels, and the recording booth with its freshly installed equipment. In the songwriting lounge, she turned to him. Do you think we'll ever make a record together? He raised an eyebrow. Me? On a record? You play better than half the studio musicians I've worked with. Maybe, but only if you sing lead. She grinned. Deal. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Word of the studio spread fast and submissions poured in. Harlow took the lead on curating new talent, while Orion handled the logistics of expanding their scholarship fund. They spent mornings reviewing demo tapes and afternoons sitting in on rehearsals, offering quiet encouragement and the occasional tough love critique. One evening, Orion returned home to find the living room filled with candles, a new song playing softly from the speakers. Harlow stood in the middle of the room, barefoot again, in one of his old button-down shirts. He dropped his bag by the door. What's all this? I wanted to show you something. She took his hand and led him to the piano. A sheet of music waited on the stand. I wrote it last night, she said. For you. For us. He sat beside her. She played the opening chords, then began to sing. The lyrics told a story of beginnings that never felt like endings, of finding someone who saw every fracture and stayed anyway. It wasn't a ballad. It was a declaration. When she finished, he didn't speak. He just leaned in and kissed her with everything he had. That night, they curled up on the couch, the fire crackling beside them, her head on his chest. I was thinking, she said. Dangerous. She elbowed him gently. I want to take some of the studio's programs into schools, especially the ones that cut their arts funding. He nodded. Tell me what you need. The months rolled on. The studio flourished. Her music found new ears. His company thrived without him constantly at the helm because for the first time in his life, he'd chosen balance. Chosen love. One Saturday, they hosted a community festival in the park near the brownstone. There were pop-up booths, live performances, and a tent where kids could write lyrics on giant sheets of paper. Harlow stood in the center of it all, laughing as a group of teenagers tried to convince her to rap. Orion stood a few feet away, talking to a reporter who was writing a follow-up piece on the studio's impact. She's the real star, he said, nodding toward Harlow. The reporter smiled. You could have built this alone. Why didn't you? He looked back at Harlow as she danced with a little girl on the grass. Because alone wasn't enough anymore. That night, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Harlow and Orion walked home, barefoot again, shoes dangling from their fingers. The streets were quiet, the city holding them gently. When they reached the brownstone steps, she paused. I want to get married here, she said. He blinked. Here, in the studio, on the stage, with everyone who helped us build it. He smiled. Then that's exactly what we'll do. 3 weeks later, under strings of lights and the soft glow of the city skyline, Harlow walked down the aisle inside the studio they built together. The guests were artists, friends, former strangers turned family. The music was live. The vows were unscripted. I didn't fall in love with the man who owned buildings, she said. I fell in love with the man who sat at an old piano and listened like it was the only thing that mattered. Orion took her hand. I didn't know what love really was until I met you. You didn't just change my world. You gave it rhythm. They kissed as the room erupted into cheers. Afterward, they danced to the same song she'd sung the night they met, the one that silenced the community center and made him forget everything else. But this time he sang with her. And the world felt whole. They spent their honeymoon in a quiet villa on the Amalfi Coast where no one knew their names and the sea sang them to sleep every night. They wrote music in the mornings, swam in the afternoons, and made promises that didn't need to be spoken. Years later, the studio would expand across the boroughs. Harlow would release 2 albums under a label she co-founded. Orion would step back from his company entirely, choosing instead to mentor young entrepreneurs from underserved communities. But every Tuesday night, without fail, they returned to the original studio. Just them, piano, and a song that never stopped growing.